What's up, freaks? This rip was brought to you by River. River's a Bitcoin company built by Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners the right way. There's no trusted third parties. They build all their infrastructure. They have free DCA because they know it's the best way to buy Bitcoin. So if you want to buy Bitcoin, you want to mine Bitcoin, you want to send Bitcoin over the Lightning Network, you want to plug into their Lightning Network API. If you're a developer, they're building all these tools for you. They also encourage self-custody. Again, they're Bitcoiners. They want to provide an on-ramp for you and then teach you and encourage you to take control of your own Bitcoin. And they're doing this. It's a beautiful company. If you do hold Bitcoin on the exchange, you can know for sure, since they don't rely on any third parties, they don't lend your Bitcoin out, they don't speculate with your Bitcoin. Your Bitcoin is held in a multi-sig wallet with 100% reserves. Okay? So go to river.com/TFTC, take advantage of the no-fee DCA. You set up your dollar cost average. You don't pay any fees on those buys. If you're a developer, they have their Lightning Network Services API that you can build on. You can send over Lightning. You can mine via River as well. You may have your exchange. You may be comfortable with it, but have you tried River yet? It's a question you have to ask yourself. If the answer is no, go try it. That's where all the Bitcoiners are hanging out. That's where I get my Bitcoin as well. River.com/TFTC. Thank you guys for listening. If you're listening on YouTube, please subscribe, set the notifications up as well. We're going to be putting out a lot of content this year. If you want to subscribe to the podcast feed as well, if you're not around your computer or not listening on YouTube, but you want to catch the podcast on the podcasting feeds, subscribe on your favorite podcasting app. And if you want to learn more about Bitcoin, I write a newsletter almost daily during the week. Go to tftc.io, subscribe on the website, and you'll get pure signal on Bitcoin, macroeconomics, geopolitics, whatever tickles my fancy that day. Thank you guys for joining us. Thank you for supporting the show. If you can subscribe, rate, review, goes a long way. We're trying to blow this up in 2023. Enjoy the rip.
You've had a dynamic where money's become freer than free.
If you talk about a Fed just gone nuts, all the central banks going nuts.
So it's all acting like safe haven.
I believe that in a world where central bankers are tripping over themselves to devalue their currency, Bitcoin wins. In the world of fiat currencies, Bitcoin is the victor.
I mean, that's part of the bull case for Bitcoin.
If you're not paying attention, you probably should be.
The beefy Bitcoin boys are back.
Oh man, it's real. It's real. You thought we were gone.
We were never gone.
We were never gone. Although, my gym attendance has been pretty poor. I think I only qualify as a beefy Bitcoin boy, kind of in a, in an emeritus sense. But I'll probably get back in today.
We have to be eating steak and eggs at Jimmy's Diner in Brooklyn. Rest in peace.
That's the last time we hung out in New York, right?
Yeah.
I remember that. We both felt like we had gotten duped by some of the zero hedge pandemic news. But we, turned out that wasn't the case and all that stuff was right on.
Yeah. This was in, February 2020?
Almost 3 years ago.
A lot has changed since then. A lot has changed. Live in a whole new world.
Yeah, it certainly feels like it.
Yeah. I mean, we just talked for like 20 minutes about the state of the world. It is chaotic. We are in uncharted territory.
I mean, one of the biggest differences is that you now have a producer. That's kind of blowing my mind.
Yeah. Logan's over there. He was trying to ninja launch on us. I said, no, Logan. We need some off-the-record catch-up time here.
I think sometimes, the best conversations happen after the interview actually ends, and you're kind of relieved and you're able to actually kind of speak your mind a little bit more freely. Do you ever think about just secretly recording those and then giving the interviewee the option? You're like, hey, we accidentally left the record on. Do you want to actually release this thing? I think it was pretty, you remember when we were talking with the Epsilon theory guy
Ben
We had
Hunt.
that great, Ben Hunt. We had like that great hour-long conversation afterwards where we were kind of pulling him up on some of the stuff that he had said.
Yeah, no, I wonder what the ethics of that are.
Well,
If you give them the
you can-
option. Yeah,
You're right. You give them the option.
yeah. Maybe I should do that. Logan, keep that in the back of your mind.
Look into the legality of doing that.
That's it's never been my strong suit. Looking in the, am I a journalist? I don't know. What are the ethics of journalism? I never took a course. But
You mean you don't have a license? You're practicing journalism without a license?
well, I don't live in
I don't know if
Canada, so I don't have to do that right now.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Okay.
I don't know if that ever went through, but yeah, there was a law on the table in Canada where if you wanted to publish a blog, you had to sign up with the government, put yourself on a list as a journalist.
Oh man,
It's a crazy clown world. We need Bitcoin. We need people like you working on Bitcoin. That's what we're here to talk about today. I'm sure we'll wade and meander back into the macro landscape and what's going on because it is chaotic. But we're here to talk about OpVault, a proposal, not an official BIP yet, but how would you describe it? It's a proposal for a new type of vault structure.
yeah. I mean, it really started out for me as an exploration. I've worked in a few different commercial Bitcoin contexts at this point, where you're talking about either custodying or shuttling around a lot of Bitcoin, and so vaults kind of came on my radar a few years ago as being something really worthwhile towards those ends. And I started to kind of wade into the covenants conversation and basically came up with this thought experiment for what the perfect vault would look like. And so I wanted to write up a paper that just kind of summarized what I was thinking about and what I had found. And as I was doing that, I kind of found that this vault thing was becoming more and more tangible. And so at a certain point I said, okay, I just got to write up an implementation of this thing in core and see what it looks like and see what it feels like, and release that and kind of see what people make of it. And as I went through that process, I got more and more excited about it, really, because it was like, oh, this is pretty simple. This solves a lot of problems. It doesn't introduce a lot of overhead. And I think if you're gonna do something, you should have the code for it. If you're gonna propose something, you should have the code for it. I mean, that's what Satoshi did, right? And I think there have been a lot of proposals in the last 3 years that are just like, yeah, what if we did this crazy thing? And you're like, all right, well, that sounds cool, but how many opcodes you need to introduce for that? Like, what are those opcodes? What do they look like? What's the implementation look like? So I got tired of stuff like that and wanted to just write up some code.
Yeah, I like that you said. That's exactly what Satoshi did. Let's write the code. See what happens. See how people receive it. But I think for the context of this conversation, let's just talk about the history of vaults and covenants, because they're somewhat connected, somewhat disconnected, two different types of ideas. So did this history start with funnily enough, Professor Eamon Gunsire's covenants paper that he wrote with a couple others back in like 2015 or 2016?
Yeah. So it kind of did, but we can even go back further than that if you'd like, which is Greg Maxwell's famous Bitcoin Talk post.
Yes.
And I think the term he uses is like condo coins. I think the title of the post is something like an amusingly horrible idea. And yeah, so he basically introduces this idea of covenants, which is like, with Bitcoin right now, if you want to spend some coins, there's a locking script that's like encumbering the coins, and you just have to present basically. So that's like a little computer program. Basically, it's a little Bitcoin script program. So you present another program that you feed into that program, and then you unlock the coins. You can do whatever you want with them. The idea that Greg introduced in this post was like, what if instead of just that one unlocking script, you could unlock the coins based on other things, like the structure of the transaction that you're going to be spending them into. And so, he was like, oh, you can do all kinds of horrible stuff with this. Luke Jr., amusingly in the original post, he's like, Luke Jr. could have some coins where all the outputs have to be perfectly round numbers in the tonal number system. You could do Smash Coin, where in order to spend the coins, you have to present a proof that you attacked some other chain. So they're mostly just like making fun of this idea. And I think there was a lot of concern. I mean, it was kind of a, early in Bitcoin, like people were talking a lot about stuff, and in many ways, like we kind of didn't know what we were doing. But this post, I think, fomented a lot of negative opinion on covenants, because it's basically these guys saying like, hey, this is a really horrible idea because the government can come along and, put constraints on your coins that are, infinite and recursive, and you can't, you won't be able to escape these condo coins. When in actuality, like that could happen today with multi-sig. Like Coinbase could come along and say, you can't withdraw your coins unless it's to this multi-sig arrangement where the Treasury Department holds, one of the keys. So that concern didn't actually end up being legitimate. But like you said, I think it was 2015 or so. The infamous Eamon Gunn-Searer and two other guys published this paper, and it's kind of an interesting paper because it kind of formalizes the idea of Bitcoin covenants, and I think it introduced the idea of vaults, which is one application of covenants. But then it's a weird paper because like the second half of the paper is like, yeah, we could also use these covenants things to do Bitcoin NG, which was like their, almost their, earlier version of Bitcoin Cash, where you're like, you get way more throughput because instead of doing proof of work, you're like electing leaders or something like that, and they just mint blocks. But anyway, so they kind of came up with this idea of vaults in that paper. Yeah.
And then from there, we've had a few developers that I'm aware of try to play with that proposal to create vaults or covenant structures on top of that. You had Oleg Andreev, I believe in 2016. But then I think more tangibly, Brian Bishop created a vault structure. And then obviously Jeremy Rubin with OpCTV. Vaults are a big part of that covenant proposal. And so I think what you've done with OpVault really, and correct me if I'm wrong, builds on the shortcomings of Brian and Jeremy's implementation and tries to find like a happy medium with a different set of trade-offs. Is that a correct characterization?
Yeah, absolutely. My goal in setting out to design this thing, again, it was a thought experiment. Initially, it was like, okay, I really, of the covenant use cases, I mean, there are some really important ones like coin pools. We can talk about that later, but vaults is the one that I really care about because I'm really focused on how to do Bitcoin custody safer, more safely. And so I was like, I'm just going to set out to design something that in an uncompromising way provides the best vault tool. Because I had experimented with, I had looked at using opcTV, and I'd written up some code that actually used opcTV to do vaults. And that was certainly an improvement over Brian Bishop's stuff. I mean, Brian, in many ways, like, was groundbreaking on this because he provided the first real working implementation of vaults, but he was just kind of hamstrung by the limitations of Bitcoin in the sense that if you wanted to do vaults, you had to do these. You basically have to generate a temporary key or an ephemeral key, as I call it in the paper, and send some Bitcoin to transactions controlled by this key, generate a few different possible transactions, and then throw away the key. And then you have to keep track of the transactions that you generate, because they basically turn Bitcoin into cash, like a bearer asset. Like if you lose those transactions, you've lost the Bitcoin because you don't have the key anymore, at least theoretically. So you both have to make sure you actually deleted the key, because otherwise, if someone kept a copy of the key, they can then spend the coins even though you think you're actually in this vault structure. So you have to make sure you deleted the key, but then even if you've done that, you have to make sure that you hang on to the pre-signed transactions kind of until you want to unvault. And if you lose them, the Bitcoin's gone. So as an individual, that's really a pain. Certainly if you're going to operationalize that as some kind of commercial entity dealing with Bitcoin, it's a real pain, and it's really hard to kind of prove to yourself and to auditors that you're actually deleting that key. So, Brian's work was really groundbreaking, and it was a great proof of concept, but I think there were just a lot of practical difficulties with doing it. Then when Jeremy came along with OpcTV, and it's worth noting for the purpose of vaults, you can kind of do the same thing with any prev-out, APO, because they're both sort of general covenant mechanisms, but OpcTV comes along, and what it really does is, instead of having to come up with this ephemeral key that you're generating and then signing and then hoping you delete properly, the enforcement of that is kind of moved on chain. And so you can rely on the consensus engine to say, okay, yeah, you're locking up these coins and you can only spend them in one of 27 ways. Because with CTV, what you're doing is you're pre-generating the graph of transactions that are allowed for those coins, and then you're kind of committing to that. So CTV definitely introduced some improvements on the design, but the problem is you still have to pre-generate everything. And you still have to say, okay, the coins are able to go here or here or here in, these amounts, with these fee rates, to these keys, and that just kind of locks you in many ways.
Yeah, particularly on the fee rates side of things, right? Because if you preset those fees, you don't move coins from that vault until some point way in the future where the fee market's completely different. There's a possibility that those transactions just sit in a mempool for a long period of time.
Yeah, it's a big risk. So maybe to step back just to make sure everybody knows what a vault is. The basic idea, if you really boil it all down, in the abstract, what you're doing with vaults is you take some coins and you say, okay, I want to lock these coins up in such a way that there's one recovery path. So I've gone and generated some super cold keys, and at any point I can sweep these coins into that recovery path because I'm pretty sure that that's safe, or at the very least, that's from an infrastructure standpoint, completely different than everything else that I'm doing. Otherwise, if these coins move at all, there's got to be this delay period during which I can contest the spend of those coins, by sweeping them to the recovery path. So if I'm using these things and I set my delay period to a day, and I'm making yet another bad decision and I want to go send my coins to an exchange so I can sell them, I start the withdrawal process to that exchange, and then I have to wait a day. And then eventually the coins to the exchange become spendable. If somebody hacks my stuff and they start, trying to spend the coins, I have a whole day or whatever period I set to intervene and sweep those coins into the recovery path. So in the abstract, that's how it would work. But the reason I kind of clarify that is because when you're predetermining all the different paths that the coins can go, you have to basically say, in CTV, if you're going to do a vault, you basically have to say, okay, when I start the withdrawal process for these coins, they are going to go to this one address that's going to serve as kind of an intermediate wallet, a hot wallet, that I then eventually decide like where they're ultimately going to go, because presumably like when I'm creating the vault, I don't know where I'm going to spend the coins to. But if I'm creating the vault with a pre-generated graph of transactions, I have to like decide where everything is going to go. So I have to have this kind of awkward intermediate hot wallet that's hard coded. But one of the big things that OpVault does is you don't have to decide where that withdrawal destination is until you start the withdrawal process. And so that allows you to completely skip like this warm or hot wallet phase that you would otherwise have to do, which is a big win.
Yeah. And the way this plays out in the implementation, you have two different types of signatures, correct? They can unlock.
Right. So you specify, number one, you specify like what the recovery path is, because that you absolutely want to fix. That's the place you can always spend to if anything goes wrong. So, that might be a taproot address or a script that has like, a number of conditions. You can imagine like, it's like, okay, I can either at the recovery path, I can either spend immediately with my super, super cold keys, or I can wait a year and then spend with some, maybe this cold card that sits in my closet or whatever. But then, so you specify the recovery path, and then you specify the unvault key. And that's what you use to sign to basically authorize the start of the withdrawal process.
And so the trade-offs to really dig into how this differs from Brian and Jeremy's implementations. It's better. It's an improvement on Brian's implementation because you don't have to burn the keys. You don't have that risk of losing your pre-signed transactions and not having a key to sign those. And then on Jeremy's, it gives you a bit of flexibility in determining what happens when you actually go to spend the keys in terms of being able to set fees and set an address. Correct? Exactly.
And then if we want to go a step further, one of the big things we haven't kind of touched on yet is this idea of batching. So when managing a vault, batching becomes really, really important, because let's say that you're doing DCA on an exchange and every day you want to make a buy and then withdrawal to your vault, right? So you're creating a UTXO a day. If you're using one of these, what I call pre-generated vault techniques, then for each UTXO you withdraw, you have like a separate vault and a separate vault process. So if you need to sweep all of those UTXOs, if something happens, you lose your keys, whatever, and you need to sweep all those UTXOs, you suddenly have like a huge number of transactions that you have to broadcast and a huge number of subsequent outputs that you're creating. If instead you're able to take what I call compatible vaults that have, say, the same recovery path, you can then batch all those UTXOs together into one recovery output or one unvault output. And so, for an individual, it makes the process a lot simpler, less risky, more efficient. If you're talking about a big commercial enterprise that's custodying a lot of Bitcoin, then, having batching or not having batching might, make a massive difference, because if you're managing, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of UTXOs, then you've got to be able to operate on that set of UTXOs as efficiently as you can, especially if you're talking about responding to an attacker in a timely way.
Yeah, so let's dive more into that to give the less technical freaks who may be listening more context about like the particular use cases for an individual and a commercial entity. Like what would, like, for an individual, is this just more secure cold storage where they can have more confidence that they can put their UTXOs in this type of structure and get a bit more peace of mind, because if for some reason or another somebody gets access to their private keys, they have a way to make sure that they keep their Bitcoin and that attacker does not get it at the end of the day. And then on the commercial side, let's just create the possibility for better like business management via UTXO management.
Yeah. No, I think that's a perfect way of stating it. As a user, I mean, I don't think proposals that are not interesting for users are interesting for me. I didn't want to make something that, wasn't extremely practical for someone to actually use. And so this is something that I think is really, really usable, and is as valuable to individuals, I think, as it is businesses. Because what it gives you is basically like a way of costlessly introducing like a final fallback for the individual. So like I said, even if it's something as simple as like your recovery path is just a different manufacturer hardware wallet or something that you have, you can introduce that into your setup, and not add to the operational complexity of whatever you're doing day to day with your Bitcoin, whether that's consolidating coins or, sending to exchanges or sending to other people. You still keep that flow very potentially seamless, whatever you're doing today. But by using a vault, you're introducing kind of like this final fallback that you didn't have access to before. And it really, really, really makes it more difficult for an attacker to get to your coins. Obviously, the cost of doing this is that you introduce a delay period, for your coins. But I mean, if this delay period is like something modest, like 10, 20 blocks, like that still gives you as the holder a huge opportunity to potentially intervene if some attacker gets a hold of your keys at really not that much cost to you, I don't think. And then, go ahead.
No, you go. You finish.
I was just going to say, and then as a business, I mean, I think every business I've ever kind of interacted with, if there was this feature in Bitcoin, this ability to kind of slow things down marginally, like I said, like a 10 block window, if you have a sophisticated infrastructure and if you have, software developers, like, a 10 block window is an eternity in terms of being able to actually intervene and prevent your coins from being stolen. So I mean, it's my true belief if something like this were in Bitcoin, like the notion of a commercial hack happening would be very, very rare because, if not, kind of never, because what's necessary when you're using a vault is to run, what you could think of as a watchtower, which is just something sitting there kind of watching the mempool to see if any of your vaulted coins are moving. And if that move is unexpected, you get an alert and the opportunity to intervene. And so if you're like a company, this is a very trivial piece of infrastructure to set up. And if you're an individual, not only is it easy to run if you want to run it yourself, but I think you could do this in a way that a third party would be able to do this for you in kind of a private way. If we were to use something like, compact block filters or Bloom filters, where you give some third party like some information that, provides, say, false positives for spends, and then they just alert you, and then you decide whether, things have actually moved. But anyway, that's kind of getting in the weeds. But my point is, like, I think, like, I would use this for sure. And I think this has tremendous value for people at the individual and at the kind of like massive scale too.
Then in an ideal world where this gets adopted and people start building on it, might be a weird question, but like, what does the ideal UI look like if an individual or a commercial business we're going to be setting up these vaults? What type of information would they be plugging into an app? Obviously, they have to send coins somewhere. So you set up the vault. I imagine there's an address associated with that vault, so that's where you're sending Bitcoin to initiate it. And then obviously there's other pieces of information that you'll have to fill out. What would that look like?
Mm-hmm. So I think what you could do, and that's actually another benefit of the op vault approach relative to the other ones, is once you initiate a vault configuration, you can reuse it. Like you can just send to that same, address, or it's pretty trivial to you're sending it to the same script basically. But the parameters that you would put in are, number one, what does the recovery path look like? And presumably if you were creating one of these vaults in a certain wallet, you would kind of want to come up with that recovery path with a different way, because you don't want the same wallet kind of like generating a recovery, because if it's, if there's a problem with the software or if it's backdoored or something. So you come up with a different, a recovery path to feed into it. And then you'd specify a spend delay, and that is specified in the same way that we do like check sequence verify or any of the other relative time blocks. So it's like, how many blocks do you want to go by, or how much wall time do you want to go by before you're, during this withdrawal period. And then you would specify the withdrawal keys. And so that gives you all the information you need to actually send coins into the vault. So you just get an address out, you can send, coins into the vault. You can, if you gave like an XPub for the recovery path, you could generate new vault addresses that kind of correspond to the same vault, if you know what I mean, to reuse. And then when you actually wanted to spend the vault, you go to your wallet and you say, okay, I want to spend, this amount to these outputs. And then I think it'd be pretty transparent from there. You'd just wait for that kind of delay period to lapse. And then your coins would be spent.
Okay. And you'd be able to pick fees at the time that you're unvaulting.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah. So the proposal actually, like, it can't be like, if everybody decided tomorrow this was awesome and they wanted to do it, we couldn't activate it yet because it relies on package relay and ephemeral anchors or something like that. And I don't know how deep in the weeds you want to get there, but basically they allow the dynamic fee adjustment to work with this pattern.
And they had not been merged into core yet.
Yeah, they have not been merged in, but I think of all the outstanding stuff in Bitcoin that could kind of come down the pike, transaction or package relay is far and away, I think, the most likely thing. It's pretty much going to happen. It's just kind of a matter of how quickly, because like basically every contracting protocol on top of Bitcoin has this problem where you're kind of like locking yourself into some arrangement ahead of time. And you've got to have a way of adjusting fee rates kind of after the fact. And it turns out, Lightning has a lot of issues with this. So package relay is definitely going to be a thing. It looks like this ephemeral anchors design is going to be a thing as well. It's kind of being lumped in to some degree.
Do they require any? It doesn't sound like they require any consensus changes. Would they need soft forks or?
No, luckily not. It's just a policy thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then would opvault, would that necessitate a soft fork? Because it's a new opcode.
Yeah. It's 2 new opcodes, and so that would be a soft fork.
Okay. And I mean, we were talking about it before we hit record, but it seems like there's been a lot of valuable feedback on the mailing list to your original post. What's that been like? And then I also saw Ben Carmen posted something to the mailing list last week about vaults being a way to improve DLCs as well.
Yeah, so the feedback so far has been pretty good. I think, I've gotten some good suggestions from Greg Sanders and AJ Towns that I've already incorporated into the code. So that's up there and tested. And what's been cool is nobody's come along and said like, hey, oh no, this is a huge issue, or this is a deal breaker. And a lot of people are excited about it. I mean, I'm interested to get some feedback from the industrial side a little bit to see, how, like, I don't know, maybe the guys at River or something would like to have something like this. But so far it's been pretty positive. And yeah, like you said, one of the funnier aspects of getting feedback on this has been like a number of people have been like, oh, you can use this to kind of simulate OpCTV. And I'm like, yeah, you could. And I just think it's funny that, like a lot of people are very excited. And I'm like, look, if we want to do OpCTV, like we should just think about doing OpCTV, because I've spent a lot of time looking at that change. It's very simple. The risk is non-existent as far as I'm concerned. I sat down and tried to break it. I was like, oh, it'd be fun to, find some like hashing attack or something. I put that code through the paces. Now, I mean, I'm not like a galaxy brain in the way that, some of the other devs are, but I think it's a safe change. But yeah, I mean, people have been, ironically enough, like excited about this idea of using OpVault as a kind of CTV proxy. And I guess there's a big efficiency improvement for DLCs that you can add if you have something like CTV or like OpVault.
It seems like after reading your proposal, even though you mentioned OpCTV, it seems like a minimal change, but it seems like the design parameters of OpVault are even a bit more constrained, which would...
Yeah. It's like, it's more purpose built for, for the vault use case. And so I think as a result, like it really just like knocks that out of the park. Whereas with CTV, I think there are a variety of cool things you can do, but I think like none of those things is this 0 to 1 where you're just like, oh wow, this completely unlocks this new and amazing use case. It's stuff like, oh, you can, make the DLC contracts more efficient, or, oh, you can do this like offline channel opening where, you walk into a Starbucks and they don't have to have a signing key live for you to be able to like open a Lightning channel and push a payment, to them trustlessly. So it's like, I'm very supportive of CTV. I think there's some really cool stuff, but it's, I just think like OpVault's very, very tangible in terms of, it's like, okay, yeah, it really allows you to do stuff with vaults that you just, there's nothing else that kind of gets you this tool.
Yeah. No, I mean, after reading the paper and perusing the mailing list and trying to follow along the best I can, because it gets really in the weeds of the technical details of the opcode and stuff like that, it does seem like it would be a massive added benefit, particularly for an individual who would like more secure cold storage. Like I would love to send coins to cold storage, set like, hey, let's have a 100 block delay, set up a watch only address. And if I get a ding like, hey, your coins are set to move, and I didn't initiate that transaction, it's like, all right, I got to go recover to my recovery path. That would be a massive addition to the peace of mind on top of cold storage that I'm sure I know for a fact that many Bitcoiners have. It's like, I'm pretty confident in my cold storage setup, but there's always that lingering fear in the back of your mind, like, something's gonna go wrong. Somebody's gonna get my private keys and begin spending my coins, and it would be great to have a fail-safe like this.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, to get like a little cosmic, I think a lot of us have big dreams for Bitcoin. And if you start to think about something like central banks adopting it as a reserve asset, or, like FEDI getting deployed in a massive way, and, like there are going to be custodians that are going to want to see a period for Bitcoin where like hacks just don't happen. And there's like a kind of nuclear design for doing custody in such a way that like you just know it's not going to get stolen. And I think right now, like we just don't have that. There's a lot of uncertainty, and there's a lot of it's very nerve-wracking. And like you're saying, like even if your coins are super cold, some nights you're like sitting there like, oh, I hope something didn't happen that, I didn't kind of anticipate or like am unaware of. And so I think having something like this is just a huge, it really could be a piece in, a design for custody for both individuals and, major institutions where it's like, you're not worried because this thing works.
Yeah. What's the specific feedback been? Just tightening up some aspects of the opcode, thinking differently about the design of the vaults particularly.
Yeah. So one of the first piece of feedback I got from Greg Sanders, InstaGibbs, was in my initial draft. So there are two new opcodes. There's op vault, which is like where you send the coins into when you want to vault them. And then there's op unvault, which is kind of like what I call the trigger transaction, where you're triggering a withdrawal. So they have to go into this like intermediate op unvault thing while the spend delay is elapsing. Originally, that op unvault had to be in bare script, because otherwise the script interpreter would have a hard time, wouldn't be able to see that you're spending the op vault output into a compatible op unvault output. But Greg Sanders proposed a way to ensure that we can spend that op vault input into any kind of output. So that op unvault can be in like a taproot or a witness version 0 script hash. So it was kind of an implementation improvement, but it does help out the efficiency and maybe debatably the privacy of the whole thing, by letting us like keep the entire life cycle of the vault within taproot or within SegWit script hash.
Hell yeah! And then
so that was. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just gonna say that. Yeah, that was a great improvement. It added like a little bit of complexity to the implementation, but I think it's well worth it because, it's just it's a good thing to have.
Yeah. And then, so you got the proposal out there. How long are you going to be taking in feedback before you officially write up a BIP?
I was actually going to work on the BIP this week because I think even if you have a BIP out there, there is a review period for the BIP. And I think this thing is pretty close to baked, just because, again, like the use is so focused. It's not like a lot of the proposals that have been pitched over the past few years have been like extremely open-ended and like, oh, this is going to support, 101 different use cases. And we really have to sit there and like, turn up the clock speed on our brains to make sure this is going to be like the right platform for the future of smart contracting on Bitcoin. This is more just like, hey, look, we want to knock vaults out of the park. And me and, a few other people have put in a few years of thought on this. And so I'll be surprised if the feature set or the interface really changes all that much. I tend to think it's going to be a few things like, what Sanders pointed out or what AJ pointed out, but I'm not expecting it to change that much. And frankly, I'm not expecting that I'll devote like a ton of time to this, to be honest with you. I think I'm just going to make sure the code is in good shape, make sure the BIP is precise and readable and captures everything, and then put it out there and just kind of let it marinate, because I'm not interested in, pushing a soft fork. I mean, I'd love to have this, but like corralling the community is a whole different thing. And, in my opinion, like a good idea just kind of sells itself. So if the code's sitting there and people are wanting to use it, then, hopefully I'll have other people kind of like doing sales pitches.
Yeah, and this wades into Another thing we said we should probably touch on, which is governance around Bitcoin Core, particularly around coming to consensus around soft forks, which obviously OpVault would necessitate. And yeah, I think it's a good time to jump into this estate of Bitcoin governance. I know you've been a bit burnout in recent years and a bit dismayed at the state of governance and conversations and the ability to actually get things reviewed and then ultimately merged. And obviously with Taproot, we did speedy trial for that soft fork, and there's been a lot of negative feedback on that particular path towards that particular soft fork. And that raises the question, like, how do you do these soft forks going forward? Is there going to be a new sort of lock-in mechanism every time you do a soft fork? Is that the best way to do it?
Yeah, I mean, and I think maybe hopefully we've moved past fretting about the particular activation mechanism, because that's just that's so beside the point in some ways. I really think that whole controversy during the Taproot activation was honestly the people pushing that controversy were not some of the cooler heads in the project. And I think it almost felt to me we need to manufacture some kind of fight so that it looks like there was, I don't think this is actually what they were thinking. I think the participants were all genuine, but it just struck me as this straw man fight of are we going to do, BIP9 or not? Lot equals true. It felt really superficial relative to the meat and potatoes, which is what is Taproot? What does it do? But setting that stuff aside, I mean, I think Bitcoin's in kind of this weird desert right now where the guy who really, I mean, in many ways, led SegWit and Taproot, the major changes to Bitcoin, has kind of, for great reasons, stepped back a little bit and said, I'm kind of done making consensus changes for now. And his exact reason for doing that, I don't know, but I can speculate that maybe he detected it's not healthy to have one person or a limited set of people be responsible for proposing the big changes to Bitcoin, because that creates an implicit dependence, an implicit expectation on the part of the community that it's oh, what does Peter say? What are the stone tablets that Peter brought down off the mountain? And I just think Bitcoin's right now in the middle of a sort of awkward, teenage period where it's okay, maybe, okay, what do we do without a sort of implicit benevolent dictator? How do we make decisions? How do we decide that we're going to set out on this fairly complicated process of doing a consensus change without the kind of previous hierarchy that we had, and it's a really important thing to figure out, because if we don't figure it out, and mind you, almost every other major open source project, if you want to look at Python with Guido van Rossum, or Linux with Linus Torvalds, or, Ethereum with just the normal mode of operation is kind of yeah, you have some guy at the top who's arbitrating at the very least. And and Bitcoin doesn't and probably shouldn't have that. But it's well, there's never really been anything that's kind of operated this way. Maybe you can look at the internet, kind of the IETF, but so I think we're in a really tough and for many people frustrating period where it's okay, we're proposing these things, but how do we actually know when good enough is good enough? And how do we know when, the social consensus has been met? And I don't have answers for that.
Yeah, that's a very very hard problem to solve. So yeah, you were mentioning Peter Willis has taken a step back. Gloria Zal has she's become a maintainer, correct? She's got some merge keys now, so there was change there. And I know Vladimir
stepped back,
yeah, Vladimir stepped back, and so yeah, it is this weird. I like Bitcoin cores and a bit of a desert wandering through, trying to figure out like how the hell do we move forward.
Right. So that's like, so I just got done like complaining about the the consensus aspect. But if you think about the implementation aspect, which is Bitcoin Core per se versus like Bitcoin, the protocol, right? That's in a similar state where it's a really, really frustrating project to work on. And honestly, like everybody who works on it is extremely talented. They're, a lot of those people are like good friends of mine, but I just feel that like the leadership there does not have a very high EQ on net, and like the kind of softer aspects of the project are like it is the least fun project I've ever worked on in my life by probably an order of magnitude. And it's a real, sometimes I get very down working on it just because it's really tough. And for for a new contributor, I can't imagine. I have a lot of like I go back and forth about like how much to say about this stuff because some of it's just me bitching, and then like how productive is it, right?
We got a Bloomberg headline: Bitcoin developer says the protocol cannot be upgraded.
That's right. Journos. Yeah. Here's your fodder. No, it's like these are fantastic struggles to be having. Like you have to have these struggles if you're going to make something that's genuinely leaderless. But I do wonder. I do wonder what the final incarnation of that looks like. Like, is it multiple competing projects? Is it like segmented projects that where you have like the consensus engines just really narrow and nobody ever really touches it, and you have stuff around the edges? I don't know.
Yeah, obviously you have the cohort of Bitcoiners that are screaming for ossification and actually like I can't think of a better word than stalemate that exists in terms of actually being able to make changes.
Well, they may really get what they want because like, and look, I am, in the past, I've been an ossification guy. I want immutable sound money like as much as anybody else, but a buddy of mine, I guess I won't name him because I don't know if he'd want me to put his name out there, but really talented guy gave me a stat a few months back, and it's really stuck with me. And I'll bungle the exact stat, but the nature of it will come across, right? Like, so if you wanted to open a Lightning channel for 3 billion people, like all you want to do is just open a Lightning channel. You're not talking about closing or anything else. And you're not going to do anything else with the Bitcoin chain, right? For the next however long until you get these openings done. It would take you something on the order of 3 years of chain space to do that, And it's like, yeah, like I'm open to the idea that Bitcoin might, Bitcoin might essentially be like a plumbing asset where we have we go back to free banking, and maybe Fedi creates this kind of like free banking environment. But look, man, Bitcoin is not the same asset if there isn't always the threat of an account holder going on chain, right? Like you always need the ability to withdraw to chain and take custody of your coins, right? Or else we wind up in the gold problem where it's all just sitting in a Bitcoin warehouse and there's a paper Bitcoin market. Like you need a system for this thing to work in the way that I think we want it to work. I think you need a system where you can take possession of your coins if you want to.
I would agree. And so, yeah, I mean, that's something that's, I mean, it's been talked about a lot, but people don't, it's like one of those unspoken agreements, like don't bring it up. But yeah, like if it's, as the protocol stands right now, it's literally impossible for not even everyone on the planet to have a UTXO, but for a material amount of people to actually own a UTXO.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I think somebody told me recently, is the number like 40 million detected on-chain entities? I think per some kind of, Glassnode metric. It's like it's not very much. And so look, I don't want to make crazy changes to Bitcoin. If anybody goes near the supply schedule, I'll freak out. But I mean, like, Bitcoin's gotta we've got to scale to some degree, and we've got to figure out how to do that in a way that preserves the ability to audit the supply and to transact as an individual. But it's got to be done, and like we're pretty far from that point. So the people who want to ossify, I don't think they understand the limitations right now.
Yeah, I know you said you don't want to be the one proposing solutions for these consensus or these social consensus agreements to get these changes in. But if you did have a magic wand, like what is your inclination? Maybe you don't know exactly or have an exact idea of what needs to be done in terms of creating a governance structure, but where does your gut lead you toward?
So you mean in terms of like specific proposals or like changes to process? Or
process specifically, because it seems like that's a very big sort of it's part of that part of changing Bitcoin is slowed down quite a bit.
Yeah,
has the most questions in the air.
It's the $64,000 question, seriously, because like so you have one answer which is like, put somebody in charge. Like, everybody knows that's not the right answer. Like, we can't go that route. I think like you can make the argument it's early yet. It's only been a little time since Taproot activated. We have more time to sort this out, which maybe is true, but I have worries about the way the supply schedule interfaces in terms of timing with other things. One thing that's encouraging to see is, like, right now, Antoine Riard has put together this Covenants working group, and he's, holding regular meetings, and he's got this repository that it's trying to document like all the Covenant use cases so that at least, he can put some formalization around that process and create like a specific venue to have that conversation. So I think, things like that are good, and maybe you'll see more things like that evolve. The thing with consensus is it's not like someone, it's not like the answer is like, oh, just make another code base and do the alternative and, people will adopt it. I think it's a softer process than that, because it's not just like, oh, hey, run this other software, because you have to reason about the way the deployment's going to happen and the way that like all the legacy clients are going to interface. And so it's really, I think it's got to be this process of people kind of coming together, and maybe there's got to be a sort of overwhelming, like, yeah, we want to do this, kind of from the community at large. But that's it's tough, because like, you don't want, I'm not a big fan of like democracy, and a lot of people in Bitcoin, industrial users have their own set of incentives, and so I don't have a great answer for you, man. I truly wish that I did.
That's what the freaks came here for. They're gonna be disappointed. I'm kidding. That's the thing. Nobody has this answer, and that's going back to like 2017, SegWit I mean, one can make the argument that SegWit got merged into core because we hit these limits and it became apparent like, all right, we need more efficient block space. And so like we hit this wall of usability in terms of block space, and then SegWit was there, got implemented. And maybe the point I'm trying to make is maybe that's what is the driving impetus for these changes. You hit a sort of threshold or limit of what the chain can do. People want more things, and then they're more incentivized to be like, all right, let's seriously consider these changes and try to develop consensus around them.
Yeah, I think you're dead on. And like the counterpoint to what I just got done saying is like, well, all right, if there was actually some existential problem with Bitcoin, like I do think we could probably come together. And I do think the existing technical community is practically minded enough that like if there was something really rough, we could come up with something and I think get agreement and I think get it deployed. Yeah, it's almost this question of like, what do you do when you're in the middle? What do you do when you're, a lot of people, I mean, Jeremy, my God, I mean, Jeremy's got all these ideas for things you could do with Bitcoin. And he should get a ton of credit for coming up with things you could do with Bitcoin that aren't shitcoiny or ill-advised or risky to the kind of underlying protocol. And so what do you do when you're in this situation where you see the world that could be, and you're like, oh, this could be so good. You could use it in this way, and this thing could be more efficient, but it's not like a burning need, right? It's not like, oh, tomorrow nobody's going to be able to transact if we don't do this. It's like, how do you deal with that situation?
Yeah. Is patience the most important virtue for a Bitcoin core developer? That's
certainly like dumb persistence is, like just sitting there and like rebasing your code and, responding to feedback. And like from a personal standpoint, before I started working on Bitcoin professionally, I was writing so much code, and it was like, it feels so good to make things and ship them and see them in the world. And in Bitcoin land, you spend like, if you're doing it right, if you've really figured out something great, you're spending 20 to 30% of your time like writing code, maybe if you're lucky. And otherwise you're waiting, reviewing, responding to feedback. So it's a different mode. And I kind of worry sometimes that I'm atrophying, like as a dev, because I'm doing, but then again, like you focus on different stuff. You focus on these protocol problems, and you come up with like side projects to distract yourself. Like I'm working on this BMON thing, and Bitcoin Perf is currently defunct, but I'm going to return to that. And so you find ways of keeping yourself occupied, but it's a different mode for sure.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I do not envy that type of workflow.
It's rough, man. I really don't like doing it. I keep doing it because I really like Bitcoin. And at this point, I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, but I've sunk so much time into doing this that it's like, who the hell else is going to do this, Well,
that brings up a good question. Who the hell else is going to do this? And you mentioned new individuals coming and trying to contribute to core. What's the state of new entrants into the core project looking like from your perspective?
I'd say in the last year, maybe, we've actually had some really great new people come on board. There is a younger crop, in the code base that I'm seeing. And that makes me really happy. I do worry a little bit. I mean, still, it's not in the numbers that I'd like to see, but I do worry a little bit about what is going to happen to funding if we have a protracted bear market, because already I'm talking to devs who are like, hey, I'm not getting renewed. And I know for a fact they're amazing devs and they're doing super valuable work for Bitcoin. And I am getting the sense that funding is a lot tighter. And I tell you what, man, I mean, I started doing Bitcoin development on nights and weekends for myself. You know, at a time when the development regime was probably a little bit easier going. But if Chain Code hadn't graciously paid me to just sit there and do core stuff all day, I just don't know if I would have had the tenacity or the time to stick with it and actually become a proficient core developer, because it really just takes like months of kind of sitting there and being useless and getting to know the system before you can, do good review or be helpful. I mean, now some people are different. Some people are absolute geniuses, but even then, like there's a different acclimation process. Like no matter what your strengths are, it just takes a few months to kind of get into that world. And I worry if people aren't being paid full time to do it, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. Oh, it's fascinating because again, going back to, we view Bitcoin as this imperative protocol project, monetary system as we transition further into the digital age. And it is, at the end of the day, a distributed system dependent on code that people are either getting paid to write or just writing out of passion. As the system grows larger and more systemic, like these are very important problems to think about, or maybe not necessarily problems, but processes.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. It's so you bullish or bearish? We're just in a lull period here where,
look, I used to think something like Bitcoin was just inevitable and it would be a matter of time. I still think that. I think I'm less sure of it just because of these massive governance questions. I don't know how all that shakes out. I mean, what I do know is that, like, I'm just going to keep doing it because it's the most important thing I could think of. I mean, I have, like, I don't know. I do worry. I think about the physical world more these days. Like in my off time, I'm like building an off-grid solar system because I want to learn how energy sovereignty works. I mean, solar's, I'm not bullish on solar, but per se, but I want to know how to generate my own energy,
which is the way solar should be used.
Yeah. Like, yeah, we could have a whole discussion about that. I don't think solar scales, but I think if you want self-sovereign energy, it's like in many cases the most practical way to get it, But so am I bullish or bearish right now? I guess like I'm kind of bearish, but I'm like, this is so critical and important. I don't care if it's like, if the chances aren't good, we need to work on it. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense. Like, I see a bunch of problems. Although I'm someone who's kind of like a warrior by nature. And so, and a bit of an alarmist. But look, I remember you and I having a conversation and it was like, I just don't know what I would do if Bitcoin didn't exist. I don't know how I would like get up in the morning because of like things are so screwed up that like this is the one raft we have out of all this. And like, I feel that way still, but in a different way. I'm like, it is sort of, but I'm less certain that it's going to work within our lifetimes, I guess.
Damn.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry for being so somber, freaks.
No, we need, sometimes everybody needs some cold water splashed in their face. Like, be real. This is,
yeah, I want to be, I'm, and like, it's probably just a matter of being like too close into everything and like being zoomed into how the sausage is made, as they say. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't, in my gut, I'm just like, the world is much less certain to me. Like let's say that like all the political fuckery that's gone on, you know, for the past, I don't know, 50 years, like eventually does come back to bite us, and we hit massive energy scarcity. And like all of a sudden our immediate concern isn't, you know, how can I make enough money to afford a nice house, to like, how can I make sure that my family is warm? You know, and the country's focus shifts from like, oh, aren't all these software companies that we've harvested great, to like, holy shit, we haven't built an oil refinery since 1975 or whatever. Maybe we need to be doing that. Maybe we need to be, you know, like building nuclear plants. And I'm not saying any of this is mutually exclusive with Bitcoin. I'm just saying that like, if physical problems in the world get real enough, the digital world might take kind of a backseat while we retrench as a civilization and say like, holy shit, there's some bad energy stuff going on. There's some bad stuff going on in the physical world that we've got to address. And I don't really have time for the stock market or a new money system anymore. And
I can certainly see that.
You know, and it's a little bit of a Luddite perspective. And it's not necessarily my base case, but it's like, maybe that happens.
Yeah. No, it seems like the governments are fucking things up pretty brilliantly right now. Whether or not it's on purpose or via pure incompetence is another discussion, but objectively it's happening right now. And it's pretty scary, especially as somebody with 2 young children. It's like, what the hell is going to happen to you when you grow up? And you know, I've obviously dedicated my life to Bitcoin because I think it's imperative for them. If I want them to live free and be able to live a life of prosperity and joy and the pursuit of happiness and freedom. But then, yeah, you have this stark reality in the physical world of meat space where like literally the infrastructure that gives us modernity is crumbling right in front of our eyes.
That's right. Yeah, maybe being a beefy Bitcoin boy won't just be a trivial thing.
No, it's gonna be a bunch of scrawny Bitcoin boys. It's unless you have your own farm. Oh,
that's what I'd love. How nice would it be to have chickens and, you know, have a nice little garden growing, have your own source of energy, have well water. You know, those are the things that I want. I really don't care to be rich. I just really like a
security,
nice house and a plot of land, and and obviously the social stuff. That's the tricky part, man. Is like, how do you? Yeah, there seems to be this like trade-off between getting self-sovereign and then like having a social life. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, I deal with that all the time. Coming from like a big family, it's like, yeah, I'd like to go live on a farm in a far off place, but it's like, oh, I'm so far away from my family. Mm-hmm. It's interesting times. What the bearish sentiment on Bitcoin is got me thinking. Like, and I had this thought earlier I wanted to bring up, like, and I don't know. I mean, you mentioned like how Linux was run, how Python was run, other open source projects with this centralized figure sort of arbitrating what does and does not get into those projects. And obviously, we would both agree, probably not an option for Bitcoin, considering it needs to be this leaderless project. But at the open source layer of the project, obviously we have a bunch of core developers proposing code, discussing it. Like, is there, and I could be completely wrong here, but is there room for like product managers that have experience with like big product releases joining the developer community and sort of trying to think of ways to do quote unquote product launches, which would be changes to core or something like that? Mm-hmm. You think that type of perspective is necessary or valuable for core?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an idea worth exploring. And so what's funny is like, to an extent, it has been explored a little bit. Like when Steve Lee first came on the scene, you know, I think the world of Steve. I've never seen a harder worker. And his ambition, I think initially was, he's like, I'm going to come in, get to know the core world and kind of be the core PM. Because I detect that there are these kind of like process inefficiencies here. I think it's one difficulty there is because Bitcoin's such a deeply technical project. It's not that he didn't have credibility, but it's just like you kind of can't be in that sort of managerial role. Like people, like the project won't take you seriously just because it's deeply technical. And unlike a private company where there's sort of a hierarchy and it's like, oh no, this is a manager. Maybe they're seeking your counsel, but like they tell you what to do at the end of the day. Like that, because that hierarchy isn't there, like it's a very frustrating experience, I think, for the PM, because it's sort of like, okay, well, I can't really affect anything. Or maybe it feels that way, but I've kind of felt like, I think what you need are more people who have done development work, but are really trying to kind of facilitate other people's work and come up with a priority list for themselves and, check in on PRs and say, oh, I think we should all review this, or I think, maybe this is ready for merge, or it'd be really great, if we could focus on project XYZ because I think it has these benefits. And so I've thought a little bit about shifting my focus. After, what was I going to finish? I was going to try and finish Beamon and then kind of shift my focus to that and just be more of like a repo mom and like figure out, what we need to do and try and like just comment and check in with people. And if there's a new contributor, really stay on top of their PRs and try and be welcoming. I just think it's hard to do that if you haven't established like, technical credibility in Bitcoin.
Yeah. So I guess you're saying like some of the graybeard devs just need to become repo moms, let other people write the code and step back and try to not focus on writing new code, but try to coordinate everybody else writing code.
So I think so, but the tricky part there is like when you spend time in the software world, you realize like there are to an extent different archetypes, and one of the archetypes is like oftentimes the smartest software engineers in a narrow technical sense will not be people. Mm-hmm. And I think we've like both the Bitcoin Core project and process kind of selects for people who aren't people. And so sort of the existing, and again, like these people are my friends, so I can bag on them a little bit. Like the EQ is not high in the upper ranks, and like these people are very thoughtful, but it's just they're very, very, very technical people, and so either there isn't the desire or kind of the understanding to do this. I mean, I won't go into specifics, but like there were a number of new contributors who came along over the past year, did some really awesome work, clearly showed that they had some horsepower and, might be real assets to the project. And their PRs were kind of like met with crickets. And in a few different cases, I was kind of saying like, hey, these are new people. They look talented. They've made good changes. Like, why don't we try and do something with this? And, it's like nobody's fault and everybody's fault, but nothing happened.
Is there sort of like a mentality of like, hey, this is it's like the surfing lineup. Like you go to somebody's local beach and try to hop in the surfing lineup. They're like, yeah, you can't fucking ride a wave. Like we're gonna ignore you. Not only ignore you, but like box you out from catching a wave. Is there that mentality eking into the project?
I think there was a time where I would say yes. Maybe 4 years ago, when you had a lot of people driving by, trying to get their name on. The perception was, oh, you're trying to get your name on Bitcoin by making this superficial refactoring change. And there was like a big, the project swung way in one direction, which is like no refactoring. We can't have these people just coming in, churning up the code base. So that used to be more a part of it. Now, I don't think it's so much that. I think here's what happens. Like no Bitcoin dev wakes up and they're like, oh, that jerk hasn't been around, so I'm not gonna, it's more like there's a very limited number of people working on the project, and getting code reviewed is a very time intensive process, and there's a lot of work that has to be reviewed. So people's people just they don't have much time, and there isn't much net time on the project. And this is kind of like the same with the consensus discussion, is like the reason Bitcoin becomes a very deeply deeply political thing to work on. And this is like another controversial thing I've been mulling over, is like the development process in Bitcoin is like extremely political. It is more political than any company I've ever worked at, to be honest with you. Because at a company, it's like, okay, I got this thing. It like solves a problem, let's do it. And again, it's not an apples to apples comparison because the risk at a company is much lower typically. But in Bitcoin, what happens is like there's a scarcity of people who know the project, who are working on it, who have the capability to assess things at a ground level, right? And then there's more people who are like kind of technical, but they're really just using the people who understand the ground truth as kind of like heuristics, as like indicators for like what the right thing is. And so that creates this like deeply political situation where you're like, okay, how can I talk to or influence the 50 people who are upstream kind of this whole ecosystem? And that's what it ends up being. And so I think like to zoom back into the repo, it's more just like everybody's busy, but also, welcoming new people kind of isn't really a priority.
Yeah. And how do you solve that? Nobody knows.
Repo moms. More repo
moms.
I'll become a repo mom.
All right.
Buy a minivan.
Put your apron on.
Put my apron on.
Get in.
No, seriously. I mean, that's probably what I'll wind up doing, because I don't know. It's like,
sounds like a good idea to me. You've obviously identified this. I would probably describe it as a shortcoming of this inability to help these new contributors sort of wade through the process. And who knows, maybe you'll be the tip of the spear of a new trend that begins to emerge and is one of these natural progressions that leads to a trend that at the end of the day, maybe we'll look back 5 years from now and the emergence of the repo moms helped create better consensus processes.
It could be, yeah. Another guy who deserves a ton of credit here is Adam Jonas. He's like, he's done a ton. I mean, more things that you could rattle off in a few minutes. But he I think he like went down the repo mom path a little bit, and he was like, nah, this, you'd have to ask him like why he kind of shied away from that. But I just know he kind of like, but yeah, man, I mean, I'll give it a shot. Like if I think that's like the best thing that I can do for Bitcoin, that's what I'll be doing.
Yeah. What would you? Is there anything idiots like me could do? Like, are devs looking for signaling from users more, or?
I think you just keep doing what you're doing, man. I think you're doing exactly what you should be doing for Bitcoin, which is awesome. I'm trying to think. I mean, I haven't put too much thought into like, would it be worth highlighting newer devs or something like that? I don't know if any of that stuff makes sense because it is a really thorny issue. I just think like we need to start with being, more welcoming, more accommodative, but like, look, at the root of all this stuff, I think is the hard fact that if more big businesses are not paying individuals to sit there and work on open source Bitcoin stuff, it's not going to happen, because realistically, like being an active core contributor in your spare time, it just doesn't work. To do a meaningful contribution, like it's too time intensive. I tried to do it after I'd gotten to know the system, and you wind up spending an entire weekend rebasing, and you're like, okay, I didn't even make any forward progress. Like I'm just keeping up with the Joneses here, and I just blew my entire weekend. So I think at root, one way to address this problem would be like, if you're an exchange and you're making a lot of money off of Bitcoin, like reallocate that to a full-time core dev, because otherwise they're just not going to be in the same numbers.
Yeah. And does that catch-up process just get more arduous as time goes on and the protocol changes and there's more variables to be aware of? Like, is this a problem that compounds moving forward?
What I hope happens is what Carl Dong kind of started, which is the libBitcoin kernel project, where like maybe we'll get to a point where the Bitcoin core as we know it is really just the consensus rules, and it's a bit more tightly scoped. I mean, but there are a lot of problems with that too, because so much of like Bitcoin development now and questions about what's going to happen to Bitcoin are contingent on mempool policy, and like mempools, sort of separate from consensus, and I think having a good wallet implementation that's like canonical is always good. So like that's not as straightforward as I once thought it was. I used to be of the opinion that if just segment it into the consensus stuff and then everything else. And it's like, oh, it's a little bit harder to do than I thought.
Yeah. Tough conversations need to be had, though. I'm very happy that you're being this open and just speaking your mind on this stuff, because I think it's important. Because we've had conversations off air over the last couple of years, particularly. Like I said earlier, you've been a bit dismayed at the process and everything that's been going on.
Yeah, and number one, the fact that I'm bearish and saying bearish things means you should probably, it's probably a good contraindicator for the Bitcoin price is probably going to rocket tomorrow or something. But so not financial advice, but given my track record. Number two, maybe I'm just too close to this stuff. And look, like when it comes to I still think of Bitcoin as far and away being the most credible thing that could do what we want to do. And that's why I'm still waking up and, devoting my best hours to it. So I still think it's the best shot that we've got. I just, sometimes you're
just waiting
too close
through the desert right now, wondering, is there an
wandering
oasis out there?
That's right. Is the mana going to keep showing up? I hope so.
I do as well. Let's wrap it up with op vault stuff. More positive note. Like, would you be more bullish if you get a BIP? It gets a lot of enthusiasm around it. Maybe people are like, all right, we want this. Get soft fork, and let's say by 2025 we have op vault. Would that make you more bullish?
Well, it'll make me more bullish if people really want it, and there's there are a lot of voices who are like, I would love to have this, both kind of individuals and on the commercial side. So yeah, if it gets a lot of support, and look, I'm not trying to sell it. I just thought it should exist as an idea out there with working code in case that's the direction that we want to go. So if it gets a lot of support and people are excited, and it gets activated, great. I think what I find interesting from a process standpoint about this proposal versus other ones is that, like I was saying, this is a much more general proposal. It's like much more purpose built. And so to see how it'll be evaluated is interesting to me because there hasn't, this proposal is a lot more like, say, check lock time verify or check sequence verify than it is like SegWit or Taproot, in the sense that it gives you this new tool. It's not a complete reimagining of like how scripting in Bitcoin works in the way that a general covenant proposal would be, or a zero knowledge proof, Rube Goldberg machine would be. It's a much more narrow tool. So it'll be interesting to me to see how it's evaluated. I'm looking forward to just kind of like throwing it out there and seeing what happens.
Yeah. So you're saying there's a potential that you throw it out there and people are like, this is too specific. Like, why would we soft fork for something so narrowly focused?
I'll be very disappointed if that's the outcome. What I'd be more interested to hear is if someone's like, this doesn't meet my use case, or I wish it did this thing, but it doesn't actually do this thing. But again, after thinking about this stuff for almost years now, I just think the vaults, like vaults to design for, is pretty open and shut in terms of what you want. And I think this is everything I could ever imagine wanting. So I'll just be curious to see if there are people who investigate it and come up with different conclusions.
Mm-hmm. And have you gotten feedback from any potential enterprise users of this? Have you had anybody reach out, be like, "Oh, we really need this"?
Part of what motivated this is like I'm pretty intimately familiar with certain, enterprises, and just in kind of watching the design of things, it's I've kind of been like matching that a little bit against this proposal. But yeah, I would love to hear from other people who have to deal with large amounts of Bitcoin, to see if if this is of use.
Yeah. So if any of you enterprise users are out there listening, let's give some feedback. Go read the proposal. Yeah, it's weird at this bear market, everybody's focused on price and like the industry, like some of these enterprise companies that fucked up with Bitcoin. Everybody's focused on, how would I put this? Like just the market in general.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like there has been a bit of a straying away from focusing on the protocol that actually enables that industry to be built in the first place. So maybe there's a need for people to come back and focus on the protocol. Obviously we had SegWit and then into Taproot. It seems like maybe there's a bit of a burnout after Taproot specifically in terms of the mind share of people paying attention to the protocol. And that's actually, I was really excited when you launched, when you released the proposal for OpVault. I was like, oh, this is like the most interesting thing in regards to like Bitcoin protocol that I've read in quite a while. Like reinvigorated my drive to get more familiar with what's going on day in and day out. Because honestly, I've been focusing on the market structure as well, more heavily than the protocol stuff over the last year and a half, probably.
I'm glad to hear that, man. And yeah, I hope it reminds people that there are maybe tools that we can actually introduce that make doing what we all want to do with Bitcoin, which is custodying, safer. And we can actually improve things in substantive and specific ways. So yeah. That's great to hear. Where
can we send the freaks to learn more about Vault? If there's any developers who may want to review the code that you've written or give feedback on the proposal. Obviously, feedback can happen on the mailing list where you started that thread, but in terms of the code base, where's that sitting right now?
Yeah, so if you're just curious about this stuff, go read the paper. It's at the website's jameso. be/vaults.pdf. And if you pull that up, you can read the paper, and then within the paper, I link to the implementation. So that's pretty much got everything you need. And then, yeah, if you want to follow the discussion, check out the mailing list. That's all up there.
Yeah, very short paper, only 12 pages. The last page is annotation. So,
yeah, I wanted to keep it brief, and it's, the margins are big, so it's like it's not a bad read, I don't think.
No, not at all. Should take you 20 minutes. James, my beefy Bitcoin brother. It's been a pleasure. We can't wait as long as we have, both off the record and on the record.
Absolutely, and we got to counterbalance this episode with me in like euphoric bull phase.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's do this again soon. I always love coming on, man. I love to see TFTC develop into the mammoth that it is now, and I just reminisce often about our sloppy evening in the Barstool Sports office with my younger brother, who no longer likes Ethereum.
A lot of pee breaks during that first rip.
That's for sure. But yeah, it's always a pleasure coming on, man. Thanks for having me.
Well, the pleasure is always mine. Thank you for doing what you do, and being earnest and honest on this. Because again, every once in a while, all the boltards need some cold water splashed on them. Like, hey, the number's going up, where you're thinking about number go up, but number go up is dependent on this code base that is making everything work. So appreciate you highlighting some of these pain points and painting the picture of Bitcoin wading through the desert from an engineering project perspective, because I think it's very important that people are aware of that.
Totally. I do it because I love Bitcoin, and I hope we get there. I'm fine to be in the desert for a while.
I think
it's nice out here.
And I'm bullish. I'll be the bull of the episode. Like I said earlier, I think there's just this natural way of things in Bitcoin where it gets to a point where it's like, all right, we need to do something. And then once it gets to that point, people are like, all right, let's do something. I think that'll continue.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah. All right, well, you go enjoy your day. I know you're going to do some chores. I don't want to hold you from doing that. And we'll catch up offline.
Sounds great, brother.
All right, peace and love, freaks. Tiki!